presentation. I'm Sergey Filippov from the Lisbon Council. We are a Brussels-based think tank. So Lisbon refers to Lisbon Agenda, so which we had in 2000 in the European Union to make Europe the most knowledge-based leader in the world. And now we have Europe 2020. So basically, as a think tank, we are intellectually accompanying this policy. So I'm presenting a special policy brief on mapping text and data mining. And in this policy brief, I will show how research community actually faces copyright. So as a background, we see the world of big data. So there are some statistics that in the past 2 years, 80% of all data has been created. And we see all the tweets, all the publications on YouTube, what people generate themselves. And also we see developments, exactly the same developments in the global research community. So annually it generates 1.5 million new articles. And generally now in total we have 50 million publications in 2010. So now we have around maybe up to 60. So it's just very difficult, almost impossible, simply physically to read all the articles for researchers and to make sense of them. So what they can do, they can apply text and data mining, so this methodology. It has enormous potential to make sense of the abundance of data. So if you look at different publications as sets of dots, so this TDM they can connect, in fact, different articles and make relations between ideas and articles. And now comes the problem. So the problem from copyright law, I mean, it's a statement made in a publication by British universities. Generally, what it means that in the past, well, if you just read, as a researcher, you read two different articles, you make connection between ideas in these articles, it's all fine. If you allow exactly the same job to be done by software, it's not possible because software, so you need to download these publications, and then it becomes subject to copyright law. So now the problem, this is where the problem comes. So I'm not a lawyer. I had background in economics and innovation studies. So I will present more overview how, to what extent actually people use TDM, but we'll stay away from a legal part of it. So the study objective, now we are talking more and more about TDM, also in copyright reform at the European level. So our intention was basically to look at the actual use of TDM. So is it like a huge problem, or is it maybe only some people use this methodology? So just to gauge the scale of the actual use. And we do it in 3 steps. So we look at publications, at the scientific publications that use text and data mining. We look at patents that were granted in this area, and we also had extensive interviews with different experts, scholars. So first of all, if you look at publications on text and data mining, and how I did, I just typed text. So basically, text and data mining should be in the title of publication. So we see sustained rise in the number of these articles in the database of Science Direct. And you can also, from 1995 up to last year, we had around 1,400 publications in data mining, and slightly less than text mining, and also joint publications in text and data mining. So essentially, the trend is rising. Then somebody else, I refer to as a secondary data, another person did more or less the same exercise using different database, and they essentially found the same trends. What they find is that American universities or researchers, they're responsible mostly for 50% of all publications in text and data mining. And EU, jointly, it's responsible only for 1/4, like 26%. But it's also important, American publications on text and data mining, they are cited more frequently. In the European case, we can only see that in case of Finland, one article on average would be cited 47%, but that's something not really something strange. But normally, one article would be cited around 8 times. One US article 8.8 times, and the Netherlands, for example, it's only 6.4. So it's the impact of European research on TDM is less than well, what our American colleagues do. So if you also look at where data mining is used, it's not only about, well, you don't actually need to read all the specific numbers, but the point is that it's not only about information sciences, it's not only about computer sciences, but also about social sciences. So essentially more and more researchers use TDM in social sciences. That's the main idea. You can also see a number of citations, statistics, very low number of publications, but cited quite often because that's, well, methodologies presented in this area. And now as we had debate about academics and publishers, so academics also feel this tension and pressure, publishers. So normally publishers are reluctant, to say it very mildly and politely, to grant access to their databases for TDM purposes. So academics come to them and say, well, we just need to run this query on your database, and please grant access. Normally they would say, well, it's not allowed, or you need to have special subscription, or you need to pay extra amount of money. There was one study commissioned by publishers themselves. So unsurprisingly, they found that in many cases they claim access, they grant access, but mostly it's for open access journals, which are already open. And half of them, they would say they would decline any mining request if it competes with their own products. So if it undermines their competitive positions on the market, publishers would also say, no, we don't allow this methodology. Another example, it's a very surprising example. British Library tried to make a database of all publications with the word malaria in the title. And they said they need to approach like a huge number of publishers. And in many cases, it took them 16 months on average to negotiate all permissions with each publisher, all permissions and, well, basically gain access to publications. It's very complicated. At the same time, publishers, they tried to, well, they kind of try to preserve the status quo. At the same time, they also introduce new features in their databases. So, for example, Read Elsevier now allows to mine content for non-commercial purposes. Springer also does the same, but once again, it's very limited. It's not exactly the full content, and there are some limitations. So then my next task was to look at patents, whether this TDM is patented. And we look at 3 different levels. So first we look in what countries TDM patents are granted, issued. Then we look at nationality of patenters. So basically who invents TDM methodology, TDM algorithms. And the last one, who holds TDM patents. And we look specifically at the European Patent Office. So if you look at text and data mining, normally you can see that basically the rise from 47 patents totally in 2000 up to 300 last year. So now we have around more than 2,000 patents in data mining. And half of them comes from the US. So it's USPTO that grants these patents. China is rising fast. You can see China from 1 up to 178 last year. So now it's number 2. So it's catching up. The problem in Europe is that Article 59 of European Patent Convention, which states that programs for computers are not inventions. So basically, software cannot be patented. There are some exceptions, but well, I'm not a legal expert. So that's why you can see that less patents are granted by European offices. Then, if you look at nationality of those that have patents, that applicants, so, and we look, we limited our query only to data mining in the patent titles, to make it like very bit smaller sample. So once again, we find that mostly Around 50% were granted by to US inventors. So they're not necessarily US citizens, but maybe people based in US, affiliated with US companies and organizations, so residing full-time in the US. Then China, so once again, Japan. In the European Union is Germany, #1, 28 patents, then UK. So once again, Europe is lagging behind, or European researchers. We also find many cases of co-inventions, UK, US, linguistic connections. And so what you see that 50% belongs to US and Canada, and European Union is around 7%. Asia is rising fast. Then we look specifically at the European Patent Office. As I said, this is not normally allowed you to patent software, but if TDM is embedded in hardware, in devices, then it's possible. And we found around 80 patents over the past 13 years. And half of them, once again, unsurprisingly, it's US companies, large multinational corporations, IBM, SAP, even Siemens, maybe it's a German company, but from subsidiary which is based in US, then they come to Europe and patent it. And so basically we look at publications, we look at patents all the time. They say that TDM, Americans are leading in this methodology. So American researchers, they use the methodology and they hold patents and they produce results with them. Then we had semi-structured interviews with European scholars. So we try to ask, okay, basically how widespread is the TDM in your community, and basically do you use it? Do you know about TDM? What are the problems? So we try to get a little bit more qualitative overview. And we also had experts. So we had people that, scholars in social sciences, in the sense that they don't specialize in TDM, but also experts that specifically specialize, that use TDM. And so key points, virtually all respondents show at least minimal knowledge. So at least they say, well, we know what TDM means, so we know what data analytics mean. Many of them not yet technically savvy, but they say, well, we would like to use it, but we don't have skills, we don't know how to deal with that. And well, they acknowledge it's in social sciences only sporadically, it's not yet mainstream approach. And the biggest problem is not only about skills, that they don't know how to use TDM, but it's also about copyright. So they say, we don't really know how to access data, and we are afraid, we're concerned about copyright. So what we can do now, we can apply TDM to things in public domain, in working papers, non-peer-reviewed articles, freely available on the internet. But the problem in this case is that if these articles are not peer-reviewed, obviously the quality is lower. So obviously that's a risk that the outcome also will be of low quality. Well, so there is a need for data analytics courses in university curriculum. So I also would like to present some citations. Professor from University of Nijmegen said specifically there should be sharing for research purposes exception, which is not yet the case. Another one said, from University of Utrecht, he said, well, copyright law severely hampers our research. And once again, he said, we can show newspapers in print, which is also fine, which is all fine. But if you show exactly the same on screen, well, that's copyright, then we have all the problems. And then somebody from Liège, a professor from Liège said, academic research should not be copyrighted, it's a more general reflection, and a general reflection on how should we patent software or not. So, key takeaways, we see increase in the number of publications and patents in TDM. It's a new research methodology for researchers. Well, researchers are forced to produce more and more because basically their promotion depends on number of publications in journals. And you cannot simply read all articles yourself, it's just too many articles now. If you apply this methodology, It allows you to produce more, to publish more. But European scholars are lagging behind, and in the US, in Asia, well, China, it's increasingly and more commonly used. And mostly it's about IPR regime, what most European scholars say. And most of them complain about lack of clarity about copyright, not only about EDM, but generally, can you copyright, can you use your own publications if you publish something previously in a different, published a different article? Can you reproduce sort of self-plagiarism? So all these kind of things popped up. They're increasingly in favor of open access to scientific publications, and once again there was the idea of publishers, the business model that you they publish in exchange for copyright. It's under pressure, and many researchers, they're well, challenged, and they don't want to assign copyright to publishers and want to retain them, to retain the copyright. So thank you very much for your attention.